I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park, across the way, the children's carousel, the maple tree, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is new, I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you. In the late 1800s through the early 1900s, there was a place in southwest Michigan that was at the cutting edge of a world-renowned philosophy that taught a healthy lifestyle. The famous and not-so-famous people gathered from all around the world to learn that philosophy of healthy living, taught by a zealot of biologic living. His name was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. The temple of his health beliefs was located in Battle Creek, Michigan, and it was called the Battle Creek Sanitarium. The story of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, better known locally as the San, began in 1854 when the Seventh-day Adventist religion was established in Battle Creek. Part of their denomination's beliefs included the sanctity of the body as well as the soul. They advocated temperance and preventative medicine as the proper way of living. To support their beliefs in a practical way, on September 5th, 1866, they opened their first health retreat in an old farmhouse on North Washington Avenue on the site of the present Federal Center. It was named the Western Health Reform Institute and was under the direction of Dr. Horatio Lay. As stated in this advertisement from that time, the Institute employed the latest in curative agents, such as electricity treatments, water therapy, Swedish movements, hot air, and Russian vapor baths. The Institute was mildly successful, but struggled to bring in many patients. In 1876, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg took charge of the Institute and renamed it the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Dr. Kellogg thought the word sanitarium reflected the idea of a sanitary retreat for health restoration and health training, not to be confused with the word sanatorium, which meant a hospital for invalids. Dr. Kellogg's medical education at the University of Michigan and Bellevue Hospital in New York City had been partially sponsored by Ellen and James White, two of the founders and leaders of the Adventist Church. Dr. Kellogg was now ready to apply his knowledge at the sanitarium. At the newly named sanitarium, Dr. Kellogg expanded basic medical treatments to include all branches of medicine, with special emphasis on fresh air, exercise, rest, and diet. He called his sanitarium the University of Health, where each patient, who he often referred to as guests, would not only receive treatments, but could be educated in the principles of his biologic living. That included the Adventist dietary practices that eliminated meats, condiments, spices, alcohol, chocolate, coffee, and tobacco. As the San became more successful, additions were made to the original farmhouse. But even those changes were not enough to contain the large amount of patients coming to the sanitarium. On April 10, 1878, the new four-storied Old Main was opened next to the farmhouse facing Washington Avenue. And the San's attendance grew. In 1880, Dr. Kellogg hired his younger brother, Will Keith Kellogg, known as WK, as the bookkeeper and business manager. Over time, his many duties increased until he was managing all the day-to-day operations of the SAN. WK also assisted Dr. Kellogg with his experiments to create new food products in the sanitarium's experimental kitchens. Because of the SAN's continued popularity, the South Edition was constructed in 1884. That same year, the Battle Creek Sanitarium Nurses Training School opened. The school functioned under various names until it closed in 1934. Over its years of operation, the school had graduated over 2,000 nurses and a multitude of other health-related degrees, such as dietitians, exercise therapists, laboratory and radiology technicians, and more. In 1886, a separate sanitarium hospital was built just north of the SAN. It was a 5-storied building where surgical procedures were performed and patients recovered, separated from the regular sanitarium guests. As part of the SAN's complex of health facilities, there was even a retreat south of Battle Creek on the shores of Gogwak Lake. It was called the Sanitarium Villa, a place where patients could enjoy the quiet serenity of country life by the calming waters, whose many activities included swimming and boating. During the years 1890 through 91, the North Edition was built to bring the total number of guest rooms at the SAN to house between 300 and 400 patients at one time. Additional, less expensive boarding facilities were available at 15 cottages on or near the SAN grounds. These were houses that had been purchased by the SAN or donated by advocates of biologic living. Many of the SAN's staff were also housed in dormitories and homes near the main facility. Many of the employees were unpaid. The belief was that they were thrilled to be working under the direction of the famous Dr. Kellogg and serving in his battle against poor health. At least, that's what Dr. Kellogg wanted them to believe. As Dr. Kellogg's fame as a physician, surgeon, and health philosopher grew, he wanted to give the impression that he was on the cutting edge of many forms of new technology, both medical and social, as shown in this photograph of a demonstration of a newfangled device called an Edison phonograph, demonstrated at the sanitarium. As part of his dream of a complete vegetarian diet, Dr. Kellogg invented and helped invent hundreds of different types of plant-based foods for his patients. They included granola cereals, along with meat and coffee substitutes. Among them, in 1892, he invented nut butter, an early form of peanut butter. Along with the many food products, Dr. Kellogg designed many exercise and health devices. He invented breathing equipment to make fresh air available around the clock for his guests, such as this fresh air hood that attached to an open window and used a cloth tube to fit over the head of the bed, so the user could breathe in the fresh, healthy outside air while remaining warm under the blankets. Many of these inventions were sold for home use, which his brother, W.K., was put in charge of selling through a mail order service. It became a large side business and moneymaker for the sanitarium. Probably the most significant and famous product developed at the sanitarium was the creation of flaked cereal, invented as a result of a complaint by a SAN's guest who broke her false teeth on one of the hard biscuits served in the SAN's dining room. Dr. Kellogg realized they needed to create a new and more palatable and less dental damaging way to eat grains. The doctor and W.K. Kellogg had tried and tried to produce a form of flaked cereal by flattening wheat through heavy rollers. They just couldn't get it to work. They were stumped on how to keep the grain from clumping together, until after one evening in 1895, by mistake, they left a batch of cooked wheat out overnight. The next morning, when they put the left out wheat through the rollers, it produced flakes. They had invented what we now call breakfast cereal. Granos was what they named the first wheat flakes, and in 1898 they developed corn flakes. They began producing their flakes in this small building behind the sanitarium near Brook Street. WK often referred to this as his first cereal factory. The cereal was originally intended to be eaten dry, no milk. Dr. Kellogg believed the dry flakes would be a dental abrasive, gum massager, and a digestive agent, but people added cream and sometimes even sugar, much to Dr. Kellogg's horror. The flake cereal was so popular on the San menu that a larger factory was eventually constructed near the San to meet the demand for its patients to eat the flake cereal at home. It was named the Sanitas Cereal Company. The popularity of Dr. Kellogg's food products did not go unnoticed. In 1891, Charles William Post was a patient at the San and observed many of the new food products created in the San's experimental kitchens. Later, after leaving the San, he introduced Postum in 1895, his own grain-based coffee alternative that he had seen being served at the San. After its success, he began selling grape nut cereal in 1898 and Post Toasties in 1906. By selling these products, inspired by the foods he had seen at the sanitarium, and through creative advertising, C.W. Post quickly became a millionaire. With Post's success, many entrepreneurs flocked to the area and many cereal companies opened in Battle Creek, hoping their location in the town that invented the breakfast food would make their businesses more marketable. In the early 1900s, there were up to 30 cereal companies in town, even though many only existed on paper. This cartoon in a national magazine illustrated the cereal boom in Battle Creek. WK tried to convince his brother that selling their cereal commercially could make the San a lot of money, but Dr. Kellogg declined that proposal. He thought his biological living philosophy would be tarnished if he tried to make a profit commercially from breakfast cereal. About this time, WK began thinking of leaving the San and starting his own cereal company. He had become unhappy living in the shadow of his famous brother, but because of his loyalty to the business he had run for almost 25 years, he wanted to make sure that the San was financially stable before he would leave. So he planned his resignation for the early part of the 20th century. By that time, the San had become such a popular health destination that there were branches of the sanitarium opening across the country and even around the world. The popularity of the San's health regime, both social and financial, also did not go unnoticed by others seeking their fortune in teaching healthy lifestyle as a way to make a profit. Many small businesses tried to copy the San's success, but the largest was started by Neil Phelps. In 1901, the Phelps Sanatorium opened on Washington Avenue, just a short distance away from Dr. Kellogg's San. It was a striking structure, being the largest fieldstone building in the United States. Phelps was hoping to capitalize on the fame of the San, but he could not compete with Dr. Kellogg, and in 1904, the Phelps Sanatorium went bankrupt and closed. The building was purchased by C.W. Post and leased to Bernard McFadden. At one time, McFadden was a popular health purveyor and a gentleman who liked to pose shirtless in many pictures. That business was also not able to compete with the San and closed its doors after operating for just a few years. Even though the most modern and scientific wonders of healthcare were being carried out in the sanitarium, the building was becoming outdated and its wooden framework a liability. On February 18, 1902, the sanitarium and sanitarium hospital burned down. The healthy feature of having excellent air circulation ducts contributed to the speed of the spreading fire. The cause of the fire was never determined. Amazingly, only one guest was killed in the fire, an 83-year-old man who attempted to return to his room to retrieve his belongings. The financial loss to the sanitarium was $400,000. The loss of the guest's personal property was $500,000. Dr. Kellogg, with the help of his brother W.K., began plans to begin a new building. W.K. had decided to postpone his resignation and put his business and financial skills to work for the sanitarium. 3 months after the fire destroyed the original sanitarium, a cornerstone ceremony was held on May 11, 1902, to begin the new sand construction. Not only did Dr. Kellogg convince the Seventh-day Adventist Governing Board to rebuild, the Battle Creek community was wholly behind the new facility. Dr. Kellogg used all of his medical knowledge and dreams of a temple of health to design the new building, and the construction took place at a rapid pace. The 5-storied structure was dedicated on May 31, 1903, with a huge celebration. People wanted to see this marvel of modern technology. The 550-foot-long Italian Renaissance structure faced Washington Avenue and was built for approximately $700,000, and all aspects of its construction were overseen by W.K. The new sand was designed by Dayton, Ohio architect Frank M. Andrews. The interior space held about 7 acres and could hold approximately 1,000 guests, and was touted as being fireproof, frostproof, and windproof. The front elevation of the new sand was distinguished by a series of 6 ionic pillars, superimposed on 5 entrance arches, flanked by a series of arched openings that extended in either direction to create open galleries for patients so they could be shielded from the elements but exposed to fresh air. The sand's elegant and large main entrance lobby was decorated by large potted plants, areas for the guests to be greeted, an impressive main desk, and bellboys to carry luggage to guests' room. Beyond the entrance lobby was a 2-storied glass-covered palm garden that included a rustic waterfall, fish pond, along with citrus, rubber, palm, and banana trees that were available year-round for the guests to enjoy. Behind the palm garden, at the back of the main building, were 3 wings that contained a gymnasium, along with separate men's and women's bath and exercise areas. Both had a temperature-controlled indoor swimming pool. The new sand building could administer over 200 types of water therapies and treatments. Many of the guest treatments included light therapy, where they would use electric light bulbs to bathe a patient in light while they rested, or sometimes in an even more intense light box therapy. Dr. Kellogg had guests exercising outside of the building as much as possible, as shown here in this exercise routine outside the front entrance. The surgical suites were housed on the 6th floor, with the new operating rooms located at the north end of the building. Dr. Kellogg had the new Sands dining room built on the top floor of the building and called it Dining in the Trees. He felt that having the kitchen and eating area on the roof would keep the smells of food preparation above the guests' noses, many of which were attending the Sand for dietary issues. Also on the south end of the roof was an outdoor area where patients could breathe in the fresh air after a meal and view the city. This is when Dr. Kellogg began his outdoor after-dinner marches, which were fun for the guests and also a great way to exercise. Some of the Sand staff also enjoyed the exposed roof area, having a little fun, as shown here. As part of his belief in educating the Sands patients, Dr. Kellogg conducted a weekly question box where patrons could write questions and drop them in a special box. Then he would answer the questions in front of an audience after dinner once a week. The Sand itself kept expanding, and in 1911, the former competitor's Fieldstone Sanatorium building was purchased and became the annex for overflow patients. A taxi shuttle service was set up to transport patients back and forth from the annex to the main SAN for treatments in just 3 minutes. In 1906, when he felt the SAN was financially stable, W.K. resigned his position and started his own Kellogg Toasted Cornflake Company. And after some legal contentions with his brother over the Kellogg name, they spoke rarely, and he was no longer able to advise the doctor on how to run the SAN. The SAN grew in popularity with continued advertising about its healthful treatments and lifestyle. It was successful and brought in more patients. By the mid-1920s, the SAN's board of directors decided to build an opulent addition to the building to attract more high-paying guests. The 80-year-old Dr. Kellogg was not in favor of the action, but the board of directors prevailed and construction began at the south end of the building. As the steel framework took form, 2 female students from Battle Creek College decided to show their physical prowess and scale the exterior of that framework. They succeeded, but were reprimanded. After graduating with a degree in education and physical therapy, one of them, Gertrude Brower, went on to become a prominent educator in Battle Creek. She was a strong-willed woman and was instrumental in the design of Coburn Elementary School, where she was also the principal for many years. In 1928, the 15-storied Towers addition was completed at a cost of over $3 million, excluding the furnishings. The first person to sign the guest book in the new addition was Henry Ford. The building was designed by Chicago architect M.J. Morehouse. It contained an additional 265 hotel-like guest rooms and suites. A majority of those rooms had private bathrooms, a convenience that was not common in hospitals at that time. The rooms were finally furnished by Marshall Field's department store of Chicago. The new entrance circle drive dropped guests off at a long colonnaded porch containing 32 pillars. The 2-story high lobby had 12 massive Mancata marble columns with golden Corinthian capitals that supported a coffered Florentine ceiling. 2 large gold and mirrored chandeliers, along with 8 rose glass and gold auxiliary light fixtures, illuminated the opulent lobby. 2 beautifully appointed parlors, one for men and the other for women, were at either end of the main lobby. On the lobby's second-floor balcony, there was a large enclosed porch that opened to the outdoors for the guests to enjoy fresh air. Attached to the back of the Towers building was a 10,000-square-foot dining room. At the time of its construction, it was the largest dining area in the world under one roof with no visible ceiling support columns. The dining room contained 8 chandeliers, each of them 8 foot tall, with cut glass Czechoslovakian lead crystal, each containing 100 light bulbs. The walls were decorated with 24 hand-painted murals. The dining room could serve up to 1,000 people at a time. There was also a smaller, but still ornate dining room towards the back of the building for smaller gatherings, along with a private dining room for intimate meals. The dining room roof was designed with a 15,000 square foot red-tiled outdoor sun garden that was a promenade deck for exercise formations and social gatherings. By the 1920s, these exercise marches were sometimes called the Hop on the Top. There was also a viewing area on the top of the tower with a spectacular view of the surrounding city and countryside. The extensive SAN properties at that time included indoor and outdoor swimming pools, tennis courts, a separate union building, that contained a large arena-style gymnasium for sporting events, a swimming pool, and bowling alleys that cost $350,000 and is now the Battle Creek Central High School Fieldhouse. There was also a $56,000 creamery building for processing milk products for the Sand that eventually was sold to Ashley Dairy. There was a huge laundry, the largest in Michigan at the time. There was a heating power plant that cost $55,000, its own wells with a $55,000 pumping and water softening plant, along with greenhouses, farms, orchards, and dairy barns in the surrounding countryside. The grounds of the Sand were connected to the city of Battle Creek's Irving Park, a beautifully landscaped area that included stone grottos, lagoons, and bridges that guests were able to enjoy. At its height in the late 1920s, the Sand could accommodate over 1,250 patients at a time, with a staff of 1,800. As part of his health practices, Dr. Kellogg continued to believe that an important part of a healthy lifestyle included exposing a patient to as much light as possible, so his male guests exercised in what is best described loincloths. There were outdoor exercises that included group activities, and Dr. Kellogg was clever enough to have a wood-cutting exercise that produced a great workout and firewood for the sanitarium. The Sand continued to use every available space to allow guests to exercise in the fresh air, even the tower building's observation deck. Over the lifetime of its existence, more than 400,000 people visited the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Included in those guests were the very prominent in business, political, and social circles. President Taft was the 100,000th guest to be registered during the Sand's Golden Jubilee in 1911. Other famous guests were Eleanor Roosevelt, Johnny Weissmuller, shown here in the Sand swimming pool, George Bernard Shaw, Booker T. Washington, John D. Rockefeller, Lowell Thomas, Eddie Cantor, Harvey Firestone, J.C. Penney, and Amelia Earhart, shown here in her autogyro with Dr. Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg consulted and performed experiments with many distinguished medical experts from around the world that included Louis Pasteur and Ivan Pavlov. Yep, the one made famous with the salivating dogs. The Sand's fame grew so much that in the 1930s, they opened a branch in Florida named the Miami Battle Creek Sanitarium. But the opulent lifestyles and high-paying guests came to an end in October 1929 when the stock market crashed and the Great Depression followed. Attendance to the Sand dropped when the wealthy could no longer afford the treatment. That, along with the heavy debt incurred by the new building, meant bad financial times for the Sand. By 1933, the Sand went into receivership and continued to lose money. In 1942, the United States Army bought the main Sand buildings for about $2.5 million. The Army renamed the facility Percy Jones Army Hospital, named after Colonel Percy L. Jones, who had served 30 years as a surgeon in the Army. The newly named hospital opened in January 1943 as the largest military medical facility in the world and specialized in amputee surgery and recovery. Thousands of soldiers were treated there. Many celebrities and entertainers visited the wounded veterans, including movie star Vera Vague, Jerry Coloma, and Bob Hope. To assist the physically handicapped military patients, the city of Battle Creek began rebuilding street crossings with slanting ramps to assist amputees in navigating the town, making much of the community barrier-free many years ahead of its time. Dr. Kellogg moved the remaining sanitarium operations into the former Fieldstone Annex building just down the street, and initially the move seemed successful. But after 67 years as the director of the sanitarium, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg died in 1943 at the age of 91. Over the course of his life, he had performed 22,000 operations free of charge. Dr. Kellogg invented some 80 new grain and nut products, along with medical devices, and had written over 100 health-related books. He had never accepted a salary from the sanitarium, but earned his income by royalties from his books teaching his biologic living philosophy. With Dr. Kellogg's passing, the SAN began to decline in popularity. The sanitarium continued operations for many years, but because of litigation by Adventists who contended that a portion of the SAN's funds belongs to them, it created additional financial difficulties, and its medical philosophy lost public interest. New healthcare practices and fads drew patients away. In 1959, it was renamed the Battle Creek Health Center and tried to remain relevant. In 1966, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, President Lyndon Johnson visited the city and spoke on the east lawn of the Fieldstone building to a crowd of more than 40,000 people. A new hospital building, called the Jeffries Wing, named after longtime sanitarium physician Dr. James Jeffrey, was opened in the early 1970s, and along with general medical procedures and surgeries, became an acute care facility for alcohol and drug-related problems. In 1974, it became under the direction of the Seventh-day Adventist General Conference and was renamed the Battle Creek Sanitarium Hospital. In the late 1970s, there was a move to demolish the old Fieldstone portion of the building, but a group of citizens formed a Save the Sand committee and raised funds to develop an alternative plan for the iconic building. That study showed a need for senior housing in the community, and the Fieldstone building had patient rooms with connected bathrooms that could easily be made into apartments. As an effort to preserve it, the Fieldstone building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1977. But in 1985, the Fieldstone building was sold and demolished to the surprise and dismay of the community. The largest Fieldstone building in the United States came down. But not everything was destroyed. The cupola from the building was saved and became a fixture at the Lila Arboretum Children's Garden. The remaining building became part of Battle Creek Health System in 1993 and was renamed the Behavioral Health Center, mostly dealing with mental health issues along with drug and alcohol abuse problems. In 1993, the sanitarium story was used as a basis for a very popular book of fiction, The Road to Wellville by T.C. Boyle, and that was made into a financially unpopular movie of the same name. It fictitiously sensationalizes activities at Dr. Kellogg's Temple of Health and features sex, buck teeth, enemas, and a sinusoidal bath that electrocutes some of the characters as part of the plot. Today, any original sanitarium buildings that are still standing are owned by the federal government and operated as part of the Hart-Dole-Ianaway Federal Center. The facility was renamed for Senators John Hart, Bob Dole, and Daniel Ianaway in 2003. They had all been patients at Percy Jones Army Hospital after receiving wounds in combat. The facility has continued to be updated with fiber optic computer connections and houses many departments of the federal government. The interior of the large complex that includes the lobbies and dining room are still beautiful showpieces of an opulent past. But the future of the building is always in question as the government moves forward and tries to find economical ways to operate such a large facility. My hope is that a useful way to operate and preserve this magnificent edifice and former Temple of Health can be found, so future generations can enjoy its history, its beauty, and keep it useful for those future generations, and demonstrate what can evolve from an intelligent and useful philosophy of health.